Good morning, everybody. Sunday morning. Is it working? Okay, thank you. So I want to this session. I want to kind of keep very relaxed. It's Sunday morning. It's quite high level, so I'm going to try and kind of pitch it somewhere in the middle. In England, lots of teachers are becoming action research informed or research rich, because we're now in a place with social media particularly where we can find lots and lots of sources, but one, how do I know if that source is trustworthy? Two, where do I start? Three, I'm a teacher, I'm very busy, I have to do my marking. When am I going to get a chance to do research? So I want to kind of share the action research project that I did with 7 state schools in England with 13 teachers, very challenging, disadvantaged students, and essentially looking at a bit of an academic process and an action research process in the classroom. When we think about academic research, it's kind of kudos, it has a university stamp, it has lots of ethics and a proper research methodology. But in the classroom, as a teacher researching with my own students, it doesn't have as much substance or credibility. I believe that it should, and it does, but how can teachers do it reliably with a bit of rigor and academic knowledge in the busy world of teaching? So I want to kind of show you through a couple of plans. So in your handouts you've got the 5-minute research plan and the 5-minute CPD plan. The CPD one stands for Continued Professional Development. So that's for if you're a teacher that trains other teachers, or sometimes you come to share your ideas with other people, such as in this circumstance. For me, it's another version of my 5-minute lesson plan that was very famous on my website. So I've just thought about different aspects of school life and come up with another version. So there's 2 there. So I probably want to spend 5 or 10 minutes with each of you in groups talking about the research plan, because I want you to just think about what's going to make you a better teacher, what's going to improve the teachers around you in your school, and then at another level, improve your school community. And that comes from being immersed with action research and reflection and collaboration. At a higher level in England, teachers are now creating their research inquiry question for appraisal. Do teachers have appraisal in Belarus where you set targets? Do you get set targets as teachers by your managers? So in England, we're now in a place where teachers are starting to set their own targets. So for me, I would be more motivated to do my own research, and then you judge me and give me my salary based on my own research inquiry, what I want to find out. Behind all the research question, there's lots of academic rigor and challenge. So the line manager, another teacher who's on the same level as me, maybe a parent, maybe a governor. So do you have governors in schools? It's like a volunteer who helps the school leadership. Trying to just think of an equivalent. It's like a volunteer who comes to support the school and holds the head teacher to account. So you might have a local government person to support the school. So things like that. Anyway, so if I just go through, I'm just going to show you this slide first of all. These are some things that I've been using, so I don't want to kind of break the slideshow. So at the end I'll probably come off the PowerPoint and show you some of these. Number 2, I wonder what the Belarusian equivalent is. I don't know what it is, but I've been looking at the EEF stands for the Education Endowment Foundation in England, and it's a research organisation that goes into schools. The government funds the schools, and the schools do their own research, and then the Education Endowment Foundation published the research papers for teachers to read. So at the end I can show you the website, and it produces it's a bit like John Hattie's Visible Learning, Teaching and Learning Toolkit. You can see the evidence versus the costs and what impact it has on pupil progress per month. The third one is Google Scholar, so I'll show you the Belarusian equivalent and how easy it is to access research for free. These three are apps. There's a million others. These are just the ones that I use. Pocket, it downloads all the data, so I'm sure you're like me, you email yourself things to read, and then you have an email inbox with lots of emails and you don't know where to start. So Pocket saves it on an application separate, and it downloads the data, so even if you're on the underground, you can still read it because it's already been downloaded. So it's good for like traveling on airplanes or trains. And it's a great place to kind of just file and save things away from your email inbox to stop you getting cluttered and a cloudy mind. These two are more kind of academic ones that I'm starting to use as a researcher for my PhD. They are ways of using correct citation if I want to write an assignment, and it quotes the author and the year and things like that. So I'm going to come back to those two documents in your hands. But I just want to show you this on the screen. This is a little book called The Decision Book. You can get it on Amazon. Inside it's got 50 ideas, and each page is an idea. On one side it's got the description, on the other side it's got a graphic. So this is my version of one of the ideas called the feedback box. I think this is great for giving children feedback, giving each other feedback when we observe each other teach. And it's just one of the ideas, and I'm sharing you this because it links to the research project that we did with the 13 teachers in the 7 state schools. So when you think of when you give feedback and making decisions, this one particularly is called the Eisenhower Matrix. Have you heard of Stephen Covey, anybody? Highly effective people? So this is really good for, I've got another version on this on feedback later, but this one is good for making decisions. I used to have this on my wall, so on a whiteboard. I used to put all my things I had to do. I would take a picture on my phone and go and just have it on my phone, so I wouldn't take all my work home, because as a teacher you can be doing all your work at home as well as in school. And that was just my way of deciding what was the most urgent thing that needed to be done. And as I became a school leader, I had to start managing other people, so much of my work was not just in the classroom, but whole school level with 200 staff. So I had to do lots of kind of big, important things. The things that would typically be here, the things that are not important or not urgent, are things like tidying your office, or reading a journal that you've had on your table for 1 month and you haven't had time to read it, and it ends up in the bin. Okay? So there's great ideas in this book. It's worth checking out. But there's some really useful ones for leadership, but also for teaching. I'm going to just start off with, we're going to go back to the research part. So just very briefly, this part, where would research sit in your own life today as a teacher? Is it urgent? Is it important? Or is it just always in the bottom left? One day I would like to try it. So I understand that in Belarus maybe the dialogue will be a bit different, but I'm going to just show you a few questions to get started if you want to start developing an inquiry in your classroom. A good place to start, I suppose, is at the top. So if I give you an example, what does the evidence say about marking in a child's book? Okay, because we all do that. What would we expect the research to say? What would we unexpect? What are the myths? So, things like parents might say, oh, Mr. McGill, you must write all this because it looks good. And then contrary is, oh, we didn't expect those things, or it's the opposite. Or thinking of bias. So, going through the process, the first question here is, what would be your future options? So what I would like us to do for today, everyone, is on the 5-minute research plan, is start to think of maybe a question that you would like to try privately over the next academic year. And maybe once you've developed some confidence, share it with other teachers and maybe show it to your head teacher, and maybe think of it as a process for starting to do whole school research with all your teachers. So on that basis, could you just think of a question you would like to research? So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to just think, and if you could use the 5-minute research plan, in the top left you've got the research question, which I think's about here. So if it doesn't fit in, if you can just scribble it on the outside. What would you like to test? Marking, assessment, behaviour, mixed ability classes, so children of all abilities, or the clever children, the most able. Maybe you're a maths teacher. What does it? What happens if you don't use a calculator in your classroom? Will exams get better or worse? So it can be absolutely anything. So yesterday I briefly shared the research in my keynote where our teachers developed. Our question was, what impact does verbal feedback have on student outcomes? So rather than the traditional marking, what happens to children's performance when teachers just speak to their children in the lesson? That was our question, and they spent a year researching that. They all agreed on the question. It took a day to agree on the question, one day. They were arguing all the words and the definitions. And we then went through this process. So if I talk about my question that we did together, and if you keep in mind your question, we asked ourselves, what will we do first? What are our future options? So we looked at, what would we expect the research to maybe say? What would we unexpect? Maybe the results would get worse. Because many teachers will say, well, of course what I say to children makes a difference. But now I won't traditionally mark it or evidence it. There'll be no written evidence at all. What would be the myths? What would we expect if we said verbal feedback instead of marking? So then, after the future options, we asked this question, what would be the pros and cons? So we started to think of all the different ways you can provide verbal feedback through scripts. Yesterday in my mark plan teach session I had a little camera to do some marking underneath so the children could see the process on video. What would be the negatives, the cons? And then we started to look at the kind of benefits and which options were the best ones to take. Now in our research group we had 13 teachers, so there was an art teacher, a science, a maths, a French teacher, humanities, so that's geography and history. So I had a whole range of specialisms, and these were high school teachers, not primary. And they started to select the pros and cons. Other questions that we started to look at were, what would be the next steps? So I think on the research plan, if I just come out of my slides, I'm just looking here. The second box, can I borrow your? This one here is, what group of children would you identify? There's no point selecting all 30. It would be, I would choose specific students. So one art teacher just chose 4 students that were always getting excluded, so expelled from school. And she used a script for verbal feedback to motivate these children to enjoy being at school. 1 year later, the result was these students weren't excluded as much anymore. They felt valued. And so that's how she researched her question. Another teacher, they looked at, so one teacher just looked at a group of students in terms of their French lesson, in terms of the assessment grid that they used, and the students were using the grid themselves to mark their own work. But they just chose a small cohort and just half of the class. In here, there's lots of research in England to suggest that any intervention, so if you want to try verbal feedback, which is my research example, that you need to do it for at least one term, so that's 3 months. So that you can gather data at the start, and in 3 months gather more data and compare it. So any ideas you get from each other throughout this conference, if you're going to try one idea, you need to try it for 2 or 3 months to be able to determine if it's useful or not. Even if after 1 week you're not enjoying it, you still got to try it to be able to decipher or determine if it's a useful strategy. So it's generally 2 to 8 months is the optimum for to be able to trial an intervention. On this table here, measures and analysis, this is where you would gather some initial data. So if it was just 7 children, what's their performance now? And then you would want to try at some point, you need to also have a control class, so another class to compare it to. So even in your one class, you might have 7, so maybe this side of the room I'm doing my research with, and then the other students I'm carrying on as normal. So maybe these students I will just speak to, and these students I will speak to and also do marking, and I can compare the differences. So that's quite critical with your measures. The ethical risks is data protection. So in a year's time you might share your results with the government or with a newspaper, or like me, you might write it on a website, on a blog. So you have to have permissions from parents, from your school, from your government, and sometimes the student data or the names of the students have to be anonymized. So you have to consider the ethics. So sometimes just a simple permission letter to let parents know that they're aware that you're conducting some research to be a better teacher, to improve student performance, is a very powerful one. The research process I'm going to show you on the screen as we go through the stage. Then here, the chosen interventions are your strategies. So whatever question you have is, what are the strategies available and which ones are you going to choose? Now you won't be able to do them all, so you'll have to just select the most, the ones that you think will be worth trialing, or the ones that you think might be worth trialing that you know might not work. And it's really important to be aware of your own bias. So for me, I know that verbal feedback makes a difference to children in the classroom. What I was wanting to prove, which is not a very good word to use for research because it shows I'm biased, is that I wanted to prove to the government that teachers should be trusted to speak to children. So I had to step out of the research and get the other teachers to come up with their own question and interpret the research and go off and trial it. And in our research, it wasn't all positive. There was lots of surprises. But towards the end, we then discovered that there was no detrimental impact to children's outcomes when teachers use certain strategies that aren't traditional marking. Okay, so this is the process that we used. Thank you. So, other questions to ask yourself. This one here: what challenges or critique would you predict? Who would be the person that would ask you the most difficult questions? And we need to get to a place where we welcome those questions if we want to be the top professionals, where parents and politicians trust us because we are really being demanding and rigorous of our own work. So we need to get all teachers, not just teachers who've chosen to come today, to be engaged with their practice, to want to be as best as they can be. Now, does your school year end in July, to September to July, the academic year? June. Okay, so now it's October, so when we get to June, what would we want to report back on? And how would we share, what could we do that would be useful from now until June for your research? This one, what's going to get in the way? You're all busy people. your line manager, parents, the 30 children, the exams, life. So you have to protect time in your busy, busy week, even just 5 minutes, like a weekly alarm. What am I doing next? Or to get the most benefit, choose like one class. Improvement comes through focus, so choosing one thing. So my top tip here is choose one class, choose a small group of students, be very specific about your research question, and plan it into your timetable so you can revisit it every week when you meet these children. If you're primary and you teach small children, you're going to see the children all the time, but you might want to just do it with one subject, maybe maths. If you're a high school and you see your children once every hour, choose one class and you see them once a week. Okay? This one, you're going to need some help. So who's going to be the person, who's your critical friend for advice and for challenge? So for me, I use Twitter. So, you know, I started with one follower, and I asked the question. So I go back to your government minister yesterday. I'm where I am because I've been asking questions. So I asked one question to one follower, and one follower gave me an opinion. I asked another question, then 2 followers, and 2 people gave me opinions. So now I have 250,000, so I have to work out ways to filter the noise so that I can find what helps me the most. And when I don't know the answer, or someone else asks me for help because I have a big audience, I just reshare their question and let everyone else just do what they need to do, and I just filter the tweets so that I don't see them anymore, so you can mute the conversation. So I guess my Twitter has become a help channel for teachers. My mental health is I have to just manage that because it's a 24/7 social media channel, and I have to sleep and I have to eat. Okay, so you have to work out what support you'll need outside of school and inside of school to be a good researcher. Okay, so let's say in June 2020, how will you know if you've met your target, your initial plan? So this is the criteria for what our teachers used. We wanted to challenge perceptions of teachers and school leaders and parents and politicians that verbal feedback did work. We wanted to also get the teachers to become experts in research. We wanted them to become critically engaged with research. So to be conscious of the bias, because what if we were wrong? What if marking is the best format? So we developed ways of giving each other feedback that wouldn't hurt our emotions, but make us more professional. The criteria for this project was funded by the Institute of Education, UCL University in London. So when I went with this problem that I knew for 5 years and through lots of tweets on Twitter, the criteria for the funding to be the criteria for the research to be funded had to meet disadvantaged students, and UCL's or the Institute of Education's remit is to get more disadvantaged children into higher education universities. So traditionally in England, with high extreme wealth and extreme poverty, typically Cambridge and Oxford have white British children. So we're trying to make it more diverse. So I talked yesterday, and I talked lots, that do you believe in some children, or do you believe in all children having opportunities? Okay. This slide is probably the most important one. This was the research methodology that the teachers used. So if I start in the top right with the ask, this is where they asked the question. what impact does verbal feedback have on pupil engagement? And they spent a whole day coming up with that question. And in this area here, if I just tell you some of these questions, what was the baseline, so number 2, so that's collecting the data at the start. Okay, number 3, what types of evidence? So I went through those questions, what would we expect, what would be unexpected? Number 4 was deciding on the research question itself, and that took a day for the 13 teachers to agree on the terminology. And then the last one was, what would we expect to see in June? So start with the end in mind and work backwards. In the investigate stage, so there was half a day the teachers were with me and we looked at some current strategies, and then the other half a day was with the university looking at academic processes for research and ethics. And the kind of things that they asked there was, what are the types of evidence? What are the pitfalls? So that's the negatives. How would we collect evidence and then assess the risks? Is it reliable? Is it fake news? Is it a myth? Is it bias? Those types of things. The teachers went, so this is like September last year, then October 1 year ago. Then from this phase, investigate to innovate, there was probably about 3 months. And then at the innovate stage, we all came back together and they started to share what they've been trying in their classrooms and started to make a tentative claim. So they started to say what they thought was happening. And so here we've got the questions, what's your tentative claim, what's unexpected, expected, those types of things. And then the key question is, how can I share what I've discovered? About a month later, so this is kind of March, this in July when we came back to reflect. So we came back to share. All the teachers designed a research poster, which we can see are all here today. And the things that, so essentially this stage is then how do we share this knowledge within our school? So the teachers went back, after we went through all the highs and the lows, they were very excited and said, the first thing, I want to share this with my head teacher. And some teachers have now gone to conferences like this in England to share it with more people, to share what they've researched, but more specifically, not just that verbal feedback is a great thing for teacher workload, but this research framework. It's a good start without being too theoretical with kind of PhD or academia. It's a good start for classroom teachers to get engaged with research. So, I've got some screenshots, Ron, I can show you then. So this is a screenshot of Google Scholar. This is a really easy way to access research. So what I would do on a demonstration, so maybe at the end I'll go off my slides and I'll show you. I've typed in here, in quotation marks, so that allows me to narrow the research. I originally typed in just verbal feedback. The responses came back, I think it was about 300,000 responses. So then I added the word classroom in England, and then this screenshot is 10,000 results. It'd take me a lifetime to find out the answers. So then I added in here, in quotation marks, let's say I am an English teacher, English classroom, teaching. Then I might say maybe I'm teaching Macbeth or Shakespeare. So I put in quotations Shakespeare. I then also go to the date range. I want to look at the most recent research. So instead of saying any time, which can go back 30, 40 years, go to the most recent. And what we discovered was there was 0 research. So the key point here is these teachers then had a place to contribute new knowledge. So whether you're a maths teacher, an English teacher, physics or whatever, you can do this line of inquiry to find out where, if you want to find current ideas, great, but maybe you want to contribute new information to the profession. So it's a nice, easy way to filter and use the quotation marks to get more specific. I'm discovering with my PhD, I have to really narrow my research. Already I've my questions are too broad, it'll take a lifetime to do the work. Now, top tip for busy teachers, on the right, so here are the results. On the right hand side you can see PDF. That means it's free and open access. Okay, if it's got a link here, it's behind a university paywall and you can't see it and it costs lots of money. So it's a really good way to find journals, you know, and some of them will be 4 pages, some of them might be 20 pages, but you just have to do a bit of digging around. Okay? So here is what I did for this research. The first one here, Verbal Feedback Classroom England. So from 2016 to 2019, there were 2,300 results on Google. It will still take me too long. It'll take me years to read all of those. When I typed in England, it went down to 788. When I typed in verbal feedback in quotation marks and England in quotation marks, it dropped a little bit to 733. I then went to the last year, 2019, because at the moment I had all the dates. So it dropped to 297. And on the slides, if you click that, it'll open up and you can see my actual original research. Let's pretend I'm an English teacher. I typed in the word English subject in quotation. Guess how many I found? 2. So I could read those, and then I could contribute new knowledge. This slide is from the Open University in England, and it's a really good practitioner, so people in the classroom, framework for developing research. So for my doctorate, I'm only in my 2nd year, I'm part-time. I am still trying to work out how to be a researcher. So I'm building up relationships with academics, with my supervisor, with people that have already done what I want to do. I am developing some research skills, and it's a nice little wheel to use for your own day-to-day work. What I need to do very soon this year is blend my theory and practice. So teachers are practitioners, academics are theoretical thinkers. What we're trying to do, I guess here, is bridge the gap between John Hattie and what it looks like in my classroom. That's the difficult part. And we've got a lot of teachers through social media or EdCamps trying to get to this part, to be in a stronger place. So I think knowledge, we know the phrase knowledge is power. Is that a familiar saying here? Knowledge is power? Yeah? So I think power comes in 3 forms. The first power is positional. So I might be the head teacher who makes the final decision, or the government minister. The second form of power is monetary. I am the person with the budget. Yes, you can have money to go on a course. Okay? And that might be your head of department. The third power is knowledge. I know the most about verbal feedback. I know the most about electronic teaching. I know the most about teaching 4-year-olds how to play in sand. So I believe every teacher can be knowledgeable because they know the most. You then become powerful. Look at what's happened to me. I've asked lots of questions. I've built up a big web of followers. I don't know any more than you. I've just found what I'm really passionate about and developed a love of teaching and learning, and through lots of questions and feedback, through Twitter and through reading and writing, I've developed a better knowledge and I've become powerful or influential. And it started just through doing this, reading and writing. So my original blog story started from losing my job, and I had a premature baby. My son was born the size of my hand, 3 months in hospital, and I lost my job in teaching. So I started blogging as a parent to tell my family what was happening to my child in hospital. And knowing that I didn't have a job and I had enough redundancy money to survive for 2 months, I started when my son was safe and healthy. I had an old website called Teacher Toolkit that I never used, and I thought I'll just update it and start writing about teaching. And then 2 or 3 months later, I got back into a job, and I carried on writing about teaching. 10 years later, it has 500,000 or 600,000 readers a month. It's just me. But it's become so huge that I can't cope with it myself. But it's just through using all these processes. Here is a very simple methodology. So do you want to take a picture? You're taking a picture of that one there. You want to take a picture? Okay. So back to your research question. What do you want to know? So it's a simple version. So I'm just going to give you 10, 20 seconds back to your research question. What would you like to find out in your classroom that makes you more knowledgeable, more powerful? A source of influence. It's going to make you a better teacher. Then everyone else wants to find out, and they'll ask you to write an article or to be interviewed or to do a video on YouTube. Positive change, so what difference do you want it to make? I'm hoping it's going to make you a better teacher, and it will make the life chances of your children better. That's ultimately why we're teachers, right? Okay. What's the current best practice? So again, Twitter, Google Scholar, universities. What does the school do next door? It's very difficult to visit schools when you have a full-time job. So the best thing I ever had in my career, I guess, through experience was I started to visit other teacher classrooms in my own school. And then occasionally I could go to another school for 1 or 2 hours to visit, and just walking around was sufficient data. Posters, displays, corridor behaviours, teachers talking. Do teachers laugh on the corridor as a good sign of a happy school? You know, are all the doors closed and everyone's not happy? Different culture. This part, how do you collect evidence rigorously and systematically? So I'm hoping by you being here, you're interested in this and you would like to start maybe doing it. But you need to book in time. I was just interviewed upstairs, and sometimes I downplay why I'm successful, but teaching is in my blood. It's my DNA code. I get tingly when I talk about teaching. I want to know as much as possible. And yes, I do shut off, and yes, I do relax, but pretty much all the time, that's all I'm thinking about, is teaching and learning. So I'm the equivalent of a professional hockey player, but I'm a teacher version. And I'm doing it systematically. I'm thinking. Even though I can't speak Belarusian, I have seen many people show me their physical passions through their expressions of what they're sharing. You can see teacher passion. You can see a grumpy teacher, battled and weary and tired, and they've lost their love. So school leaders have to renew this. And I think it comes from, rather than I set you targets, come up with your own target, but show me it's good and academic and rigorous, and you've really thought about it, and it's going to contribute new knowledge to the profession. What head teacher is going to stop you wanting to do that? If they did, I wouldn't work for that head teacher. I want to work with a head teacher who will let me grow the soil. I talked about this yesterday. I want to grow in the school. And the teachers around me will help me develop. I am not good because of myself. I'm good because of the good and the bad teachers I've worked with. And I've found my way. Okay. So, what do we want to know? So here are lots of questions. What do we currently know about XXX? So whatever question you've got, what would you like to find out? So it's just another way of looking at the question, how you generate a question. So I won't go all through all these, but here are some good sentence starters. Always flip a target. If someone gives you a target, flip it to a question instead, and then it's not as stressful or intimidating. It's a good approach. So how can we use verbal feedback in a maths classroom? And again, let's be specific. With 5 children with special needs. What type of maths? Equations. What type of equations? Quadratic equations. So being very, very specific. Okay? Under what conditions? So maybe Monday morning versus Friday afternoon. Different times of the day affect our behaviors. What's the best way I can use quadratic equations with well, I wouldn't do it with 4-year-olds, maybe 13-year-olds. And you get the idea. It's critical that you are very precise. The more precise you are, the easier it is to conduct the research, and the more likely you'll find the solution, whether it's a good or a bad solution. I think it's very healthy to conduct research that might show you the opposite of what you expect. Okay? There's definitely a place for that. So here's some examples of how to conduct a good research question. Open-ended questions allow more possibilities, so it's a good place to start. Questions that begin with how or why. What else can we say? Number 8, is it in line with academic parameters, so limitations, those types of things. Okay, I'm going to go off piece, but I'm just going to show you, here is the verbal feedback team. This is a bit of more of a formal template that we used. What's the baseline and the dates? So October, March, June. We identified the success criteria. Okay, the milestones that we would try and measure the success against. The impact, what would we want to find out? What would be the effects? And then just the tracking changes, the risks and the ethics. You know, the data collection, when do we share it? When do we gather the data? How do we gather the data? What are we going to test? It has to be the same test, because if we give the kids a test in September, it's got to be the same trial later to draw a reliable conclusion from. Can't be a totally different way of assessment. I am going to just, so the rest of the slides that you have, just kind of take you through just different things to consider, different templates. I'm not going to go through them all, but I want to just spend a brief bit of time on the CPD plan. Towards the end, you've got research posters, which you've seen before and you all do. So that's just the way that we constructed it. The research question goes right in the middle, and then the headline claim, and you've all got them upstairs. But this is our method for just doing it on one piece of A3 paper. So it's 2 sides of A4. So whether you have your own method, great, but you might want to try our version too. If I can go off slides, and I'm going to just show you Google Scholar and the research. I'm going to show you the CPD plan, which is the one on the back. So let's say in a year's time you've done your research. How are you going to share it? So this is my thought process for being well prepared, because you might have loads of information, but you might not although we talk to kids every day, we might be very shy when we talk to other adults. And often many schools don't create an environment where teachers can talk to each other publicly. Or if you're a new teacher, you might be a bit shy. Or you might be an experienced teacher and you've never done it, and all the new teachers through university are doing this all the time, and they become more confident and you kind of feel a bit isolated. So the CPD plan, I haven't got it on the screen, the big picture is, I guess, the context of your training. So in here we would put, you want to share the research of your project. I call it stickability, so for my 5-minute lesson plan, what's the key thing you want people to take away? So at the end, I'm just going to go off and show you the Google Scholar and the app I have on my phone for me to access research as a busy teacher. That will be my key takeaway, because I want you to start thinking, how can I be more research engaged? Okay, it doesn't mean be research rich, know the most. It's just taking an interest in research and how can I do it in the classroom. The structure and outcomes, sorry, that's all explained in all the kind of supporting material, so I won't go through the whole process. But I often say it's just a 5-minute scribble, and it takes a bit of practice. So you might think about it for half an hour or a couple of hours, but really just to scribble your thoughts, once you've done a lot of thinking, should be a 5-minute scribble. We're not wanting an essay on here, we're just wanting a kind of keywords. So, I've got 2 or 3 minutes. I'm just going to go off the slides. I'm going to show you Google Scholar and my app Pocket. In fact, I'll show you this on my phone. So in here, you can see the number 96. I've got 96 articles saved and downloaded to read on a rainy day. Okay? Now, I might delete them. Some of them might become old. And I'm sure there must be another equivalent, but I'm sure you can download this. And so whether someone sends me an email, a photograph, or a tweet, because the Pocket's synced into my device, it's also synchronized onto my cloud on the computer. So if I read it on the computer and then press tick, I've read it, it disappears and the number goes down. So when I wrote my last book, Just Great Teaching, it had 350 on here. And I used them as references over the last 2 years, and I got down to about the last 50 before my publisher said, you can't add any more research, you've got enough now. Got enough references. Okay, so that's one. If I go on the computer at the back and show you Google Scholar. So on the screen, let's see, I hope I can get the screen to work. Aha, no. I don't know how to get... I can't get it on, never mind. Okay, thank you. Can I have that on the screen? Aha, okay, thank you. So, Google Scholar. Could I have it on here as well? 2, here. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's working now. Okay, so Google Scholar, really easy. So verbal feedback. I then get the results. I go up here, 2019, the latest results. So at the moment there are 16,000. Let's just say I want to look at maths. I'm going to add maths in quotation marks. The results drop to 1,000. Now there's a lot of things to teach in maths, so let's look at equations. And I'm adding quotations each time. I've now got 133. What type of equations? Quadratic. Maths teacher would say to me, I think I've spelt this correctly. Quadratic. 81. Okay, so narrow, narrow, narrow. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see there's 2 PDFs that I can read, and the rest are behind a paywall. So maybe I would say when the teachers teach quadratic equations and they just speak to children rather than mark their assignments, I might want to test that it improves my workload and students' performance. So that's just a kind of little insight into just how to get engaged. I think my top tip, start with the research plan. Come up with a question, and if you look at the ask, investigate, innovate, reflect framework, it's a good method, and if you find an idea, stick with it for 2 months before abandon it. Otherwise, you can't really draw anything reliable from it. You need to really go with an idea. So if you found a great idea from the weekend, take it back to your classroom and trial it for a couple of months. I started with 1 follower. I started with 1 question. Now I ask questions every day. and I know more stuff. So thank you. Thank you. Are we having questions? Let's see. Yuri, I don't know if we're asking questions, but I've got my... Okay, I've got, yeah, okay, the lady's coming.
Приложение Pocket устанавливается на смартфон или ему может быть установлено и на ноутбук?
I downloaded it from iTunes, so it is an app for the phone, but it's also on desktop, so just pocket.com. I just link it to my Google account, and then it synchronizes between your device on your phone and on the computer.
So there was a question about if every teacher, on your opinion, must do the research or not?
If teachers want parents and politicians to stop telling us what to do, we need to know the most stuff. Difficulty is you're busy teaching children. So you need to ask questions and find out information so you know more. So when I was writing my blogs about what the statistics said from the government, so in my keynote yesterday, they tell the public teachers leave in the first 5 years. It's not true, it's the first 2. So because I've found out and I've shared and asked questions online, I've got a group of teachers who follow me because they like me being practical and speaking the truth. And obviously I'm in a country where I have lots of freedom of speech. So obviously it's a different, different context. But if you want your parents to value what you do, every teacher has to be engaged with their practice, to reflect, to ask questions, and if we have time, look at a little bit of research. But it's going to always be a challenge for teachers because teachers are always busy. So sometimes you might have to do things after the children go home. Sometimes you might want to read an article on the weekend. I would hope that most professionals sometimes do that and relax. But you'll learn more, and then you can tell parents and politicians they're wrong.
Вось вы, напевно, заважили, колькі у нас тут викладчиків жінчин і мужчин. І мужчини у нас не збігаються, вони добігають до школи. Як у вас з цим обстоять справи?
My headphone socket was out. Yuri, could you just repeat the question? Yeah. In the UK, our teacher population is 60-70% female and 30% male. In primary, so in small schools, very few males. I've done one of my books I gave yesterday at the conference was on gender stereotypes, how we impose gender stereotype. Boys wear blue, girls wear pink. We teach children that. It's not something that they're born with. So we create these problems ourselves. So for example, girls and boys in English and maths, primary school children, they get to the same point in primary school, but in high school, we somehow make it worse, and then boys get worse at maths and girls get better. So what primary teachers do is address the balance, but then in our high schools we make it worse again. So there's lots of new research for us to work out why that happens. Is it because boys are not good at maths, or is it because of our bias that we impose on others' ability? And again, in any profession we need role models. So I've worked with many children, Muslim, black, Asian. If I'm always the white male British teacher and I'm teaching a classroom full of black or Muslim children, It's a difficult one because they need role models. So if they can only have a white British teacher with a qualification, I have to bring in other people who are their role models so they get exposed to life situations, academic, university pathways. So maybe a black student got to Cambridge, then let's bring them in and talk to them so they can see their journey. Thank you.